North Korea can reach all of South Korea and most of Japan with a nuclear-tipped missile. For all of those weapons, 6 tests are nowhere near enough. And so if they're serious to field those different delivery capabilities, they need more nuclear tests. And so within North Korea, I'm sure there's a lot of push for saying we need to do more nuclear tests.
예, 전 세계 현명한 투자자들과 전문가들과 현인들을 찾아서 그들의 의견과 인사이트를 들어보는 글로벌 머니톡. 이제는 삼프로TV에서 시작했지만 거의 뭐 삼프로TV의 기둥이자 대한민국의 꼭 지켜져야 하고 보존해야 할 사실상 무형문화재로 등장하고 있는 삼프로TV의 글로벌 머니톡입니다. 뭐 그렇게 뭐 그런 자랑을 하느냐고 여러분들이 이야기하실 수도 있겠습니다만 저희는 충분히 이제는 자랑할 만하다고 생각합니다. 자, 함께 시작해보죠. 오늘은 그런 글로벌 머니톡의 기둥에 가까운 분입니다. 중앙일보의 강남규 기자님, 어서 오십시오.
안녕하세요. 사실 이번에 이제 우리가 인터뷰하실 분이 그 세계적인 핵물리학자 지그프리드 해커 박사.
예.
평양을 2004년서부터 2010년까지 약 7차례 방문했고요. 그 다음에 영변의 핵단지를 그 가운데서 4번을 직접 찾아가서 현장을 본 사람입니다.
북핵에 관한 한 거의 전 세계에서 가장
그렇죠. 한국의 비즈니스 리더들과 투자자들이 알아야 할 핵 리스크, 핵 리스크를 주제로 인터뷰를 하고 싶다 그러니까 아주 기분 좋다 그러면서 그 동안에 이 인터뷰에 응했던 모든 그 분들의 그 면면을 보니 내가 참 초대받은 걸 기쁘게 생각한다라고 그 이메일로 답변을 오면서 오늘 인터뷰를 하게 됐습니다.
자, 다 여러분들 덕분입니다.
네. 이분은 사실 지금의 이제 보스니아 지역에서 그 태어났죠. 그래서 사실 유랑을 거쳐서 그 시절에 1940년대에 그 시절의 그 격동의 시기에 여기저기를 거쳐서 미국에 정착을 해서 핵물리학자가 됐고요. 그 다음에 로스 알라모스, 그러니까 그 맨하탄 프로젝트에서 미국이 최초로 핵무기를 개발할 때 핵분열 실험을 성공한 곳 그 핵연구소 소장을 지냈습니다.
아, 엔지니어시군요, 이분이.
그 다음에 핵물리학자이면서 그 다음에 이제 지금은 미국의 스탠퍼드 대학에서 에머리터스 번역할 때마다 헷갈려요. 이게 석좌 교수로 번역해야 될지 아니면은
하여튼 높은 분.
그런 분입니다. 그래서 선뜻 우리 그 글로벌 머니토크의 인터뷰에 응해 주셨습니다.
자, 인터뷰 시작해 보죠.
예. 교수님 인터뷰 응해 주셔서 감사합니다. 사실 제가 경제 기자여서 경제 기자가 핵물리학자 또 북핵 전문가 핵무기 전문가에게 무엇을 물어봐야 될지 망설였습니다. 그러다가 이제 지금 현재 핵 리스크가 한반도 핵 리스크가 커지고 있는 듯해서 용기를 내서 한번 인터뷰를 신청했습니다. 응해 주셔서 감사합니다. 아무튼 그나저나 사실 그 북한 영변 핵단지를 4차례 방문한 걸로 알고 있습니다, 박사님. 사실 한국인들에게 영변은 유명한 로man틱한 시구절 영변의 약산 진달래꽃으로 유명합니다. 마지막으로 가보신 2010년 당시 풍경이 어땠습니까?
So the nuclear complex, as you might imagine, is fenced in, and it's some kilometers from the city of Yongbyon. And so the city of Yongbyon still looks pretty much the same from when I first saw it. It's a city, sort of what I would say probably typical, Korean city. Interesting buildings, lots of people. And when you go by in the morning, the kids are going to school. So it looks like quite an ordinary city. Actually, I was told that once upon a time, it also was famous for silk work. So silk factories in North Korea. But at any rate, you come from the city, you drive down to lower elevations, and then along the Kuryong River. And then you cross over the Kuryong River, and then that's where things get more serious, in terms of the military complex. And as you might imagine, they have several gates that you have to go through. and military that, check all your credentials. And of course, I was brought there by the North Korean government. So we drove in with them. And so obviously we had no problems getting in. And then inside, actually, the whole area to me is a very beautiful area because it's got sort of low mountains close by. It has the river. Along the river, it has lots of agricultural fields. And so it's a beautiful place. And of course, the nuclear complex itself looks like most nuclear complexes, in the world. There are lots of buildings, and particularly the Yongbyon complex initially was for making plutonium, which means it housed nuclear reactors. And then later on, they also built a uranium centrifuge facility. And so walking into those was a lot like the very early years at Los Alamos or sort of the later years in the Soviet or Russian nuclear complex.
사실은 영변 그래서 우리가 이제 사진으로만 볼 수 있지 않습니까?
네.
근데 영변 핵단지는 이 작은 강, 이게 큰 강은 아니고요. 작은 강가에 있고요.
그 영변이죠.
그렇죠. 약산진달래꽃으로 유명한 읍내가 주로 거주 지역이 그 야산에 삥 둘러 쳐져 있는 산에
분지 같은 곳인가 보네요.
마운틴 스커트라 그러지 않습니까? 산자락에 있더라고요. 사진을 보니까. 그 지역에서 이제 핵단지로 내려가려면 핵단지는 주로 이제 물 가까이 있지 않습니까? 냉각수가 필요하니까. 근데 재미난 표현은 북한의 핵시설이 그렇게 아주 초현대적이진 않고 그 로스 알라모스 연구소의 옛날 모습 내지는 옛 소련의 어떤 핵단지와 같은 느낌이었다라고 합니다.
박사님 다녀오셨다니까 오히려 이제 제가 못 가봤습니다만 핵단지를 방문했을 때 만나봤던 북한 관계자들은 어떤 혹시 어떤 태도였거나 좀 협조적이었습니까? 어땠습니까?
So to answer that question, I have to explain that I did not go to North Korea or to Yongbyon as an inspector. Okay, typically inspectors are not welcome, right? I was not an inspector. And my colleague from Stanford University, John Lewis, had been in North Korea, Pyongyang and other places numerous times. And they invited him to go to Yongbyon, and he asked me to come along. And I was former director of Los Alamos National Laboratory, so I thought they would never allow me in. Well, they not only allowed me in, they were delighted that I was along. And so because I came essentially at their invitation, the attitude of the people, and particularly the director of the facility and his, close by staff, were all extremely cooperative, very friendly, very interesting from my perspective because we had lots of technical dialogue. And so that their eyes lit up when I asked, good questions. And I know something about plutonium, being from Los Alamos. So we had this very remarkable dialogue. So they were very cooperative.
말씀하신 것처럼 사실 이제 그때 당시에 스탠퍼드 정치학 교수와 3인이 이제 초청을 받아서 갔거든요. 초청을 받아서 갔는데 그 중에서 이제 자기가 유일하게 핵물리학자로 참석을 해서 기술적인 질문을 하고 그러니까 영변의 핵단지에 근무하는 기술자들, 과학자들이 놀라운 표정을 지었다라고 얘기를 하네요. 자, 박사님 일단 그 피처링은 끝난 것 같고요. 이번에 그러면은 본격적으로 북한의 핵 능력 도대체 핵탄두를 몇 개나 가지고 있다고 보시나요?
So one of the problems that we have with essentially everything in North Korea is we know so little, right? However, because they wanted me to come in, they wanted to show me that they have certain capabilities. I think in order to impress the Americans that, look, you should have dialogue with us. You should come to agreement with us. So they were trying to show me their capabilities. So over the 7 visits that I had to North Korea from 2004 through 2010, so they showed me a lot. Only 4 times to Yongbyon, the other 3 times to Pyongyang and some of the other towns close by, just for other reasons than for nuclear visits. Nevertheless, though, I met with the nuclear leaders of Yongbyon in Pyongyang. And so again, we had dialogue. I learned a lot. So on that basis, then I tried to put together the best estimate possible. But my last visit was 2010. And so since then, again, they've shown us a lot. You know, as you know, on KC, on the Korean Central TV, they show missile launches. They actually have shown photos of prototypes of their weapons and so forth. And so when I put all of that together, this is a long way of saying, in the end, we really don't know. But my current best estimate is that they have enough bomb fuel, which means either plutonium or highly enriched uranium, for perhaps 50, 55 or so nuclear weapons. And so how many nuclear weapons might they have? So I give a broad range of, say, somewhere between 20 and 60 nuclear weapons, but they certainly have enough of the bomb fuel material for that much. So on the weaponization, you know, the design, build, and test, that's what we know the least, because they did not show me their design bureaus. They did not have me talk to their designers. They had me visit the facilities for the first part, the bomb fuel, but not for the weaponization. So for weaponization, we have to work sort of backwards from their nuclear tests. And so when I look at their nuclear tests, they've done 6 nuclear tests. And then we look at, reading the seismic signals in the earth and try to calculate how big a test that is. So my conclusion is that I believe they have quite sophisticated nuclear weapon design capabilities because they've tested both plutonium and uranium bombs. And it looks like the last one in September 2017 was most likely a hydrogen bomb, over 200 kilotons, which is, 10 times Nagasaki yield. So my conclusion is they have quite good nuclear weapons design capabilities. What we still do not know is how small a package can they put those nuclear warheads in. So in other words, what we call miniaturization in order to fit them inside of a missile. So the North Koreans, and particularly under Kim Jong-un, because that's when they, eventually, they started with Kim Il-sung, then with Kim Jong-il. Then finally, when you came to Kim Jong-un, then they had built up enough experience that they then start really to worry about putting it into a missile. And they have deliberately, shown us many of his visits to a missile factory or to a nuclear institute where they show you mock-ups of the warheads that look to be small enough to fit in the missiles in the background, of the room. And so they clearly want us to think that they have been able to miniaturize these to put them onto various missiles. And again, this is sort of best estimate. We don't know for sure. My best estimate is they can miniaturize their warheads sufficiently to put them on their Scuds and variations of the Scuds and the Nodong, which is the short range and medium range. They can miniaturize those warheads sufficiently to put into those missiles. So in other words, today, my estimate is that North Korea can reach all of South Korea and most of Japan with a nuclear-tipped missile. I do not believe that they have demonstrated yet that they can put the warhead into an ICBM, deliver it as far as the United States, and survive the entire, flight and re-entry. However, they continue to work in that direction.
중요한 얘기 해주셨네요.
예, 중요한 얘기를 해주셨는데 이 북한은 지금 핵 물질의 총량, 그러니까 농축한 우라늄과 플루토늄 등을 본다면 자기가 보기에 50개에서 55개 정도의 핵탄두를 만들 수 있는 핵물질을 갖고 있는데 우리가 또 핵물질을 갖고 있다고 다 그걸 핵탄두로 만들지는 않지 않습니까? 그래서 그 우리 해커 박사께서 보시기에는 넓은 의미에서 20개에서 60개 정도의 탄두를 가지고 있을 법하다. 분명한 것은 그 해커 박사도 이제 고백했듯이 핵 물질을 만드는 과정을 보고 온 것이지, 그곳을 보고 온 것이지 핵무기를 만드는 과정과 전문가들 인터뷰해 본 적은 없다라고 말씀하시면서 자기의 어떤 추정의 한계 분명히 밝혔습니다.
예. 예, 박사님, 저는 뭐 궁금했던 것이 그 북한의 핵 기술을 북한이 어떻게 개발해서 지금 수준까지 올라올 수 있었을까? 이게 늘 항상 궁금하던데 박사님은 그 의문에 대해서는 어떻게 추정하고 계십니까?
It's a mistake to think that North Korea simply depended on another country to get the bomb. So you just have to get used to the fact that most of their capabilities are indigenous capabilities. And they've worked on these, for half a century. And very, very specifically have all the way just walked along to learn more and more and develop their own capabilities, the physics that's required, the computing that's required, and then the testing. So you have to say I believe the North Koreans have done a remarkable job of being able to develop this whole nuclear complex, be able to develop the capabilities for the design and miniaturization, and then for the missiles. Having said that, though, they're also very smart in getting as much help as they can from the outside. So yes, there are lots of countries from which they have been able to get various technologies, various components, various ideas. And so yes, they've had help along the way. Initially, the initial help was just from the Soviet Union and from the Atoms for Peace program. And that is for peaceful nuclear energy. So the Soviets helped the North Koreans with peaceful nuclear energy. They did not help them with military nuclear energy. The Chinese actually did very little with the North Koreans on nuclear energy. Both of them, however, have done quite a bit with North Korea for missile technologies. And so North Korea has been able to borrow from the missile technologies. Some of their early Scuds were all versions of the Soviet missiles. But then, like in everything else, they have very good engineers. And so they learn along the way. And then in the 1990s and early 2000s, there were a lot of companies in Western Europe that sold technologies that could be used for a nuclear complex. And the North Koreans knew how to shop for those technologies. And then they also worked with AQ Khan from Pakistan and were able to get some help from AQ Khan because he was selling centrifuge technologies around. So their early start and their help was from AQ Khan. But then, like everything else, the North Koreans took over and they were able to build it better and better and better. And so it's important not to think that somebody just gave this to the North Korean. You should recognize them as a country that has significant engineering capabilities and the willpower to put them all together to make both nuclear components and missiles.
이 자체적으로 개발을 했고 실제로 1990년대와 2000년대 초반만 하더라도 서유럽에서 다양한 방식으로 핵무기와 핵농축시설과 핵무기를 개발할 수 있는 원자재, 자재, 중간 부자재 등을 구입하는 이는 어렵진 않았다. 유럽에서. 사실 그 소련으로부터 기초적인 우리가 이제 미국으로부터 아니면 프랑스로부터 핵 발전 기술을 받아왔듯이 기초적인 기술은 사실 1950년대 소련으로부터 받아온 걸로 보입니다. 그리고 이제 파키스탄이 핵 개발에 일조했다는 어떤 미국 CIA 보고서가 있긴 합니다만은 해커 박사는 그래도 대부분이 그 토착 기술로 만들어졌다라고 말씀하시네요.
스스로 북한이?
예. 그 박사님 사실 최근에 한국의 대통령도 그런 말씀을 하셨는데요. 그 뭐 마음만 먹으면 남한이 1년 내에 핵무기를 개발할 수 있다고 말을 했습니다. 실제로 핵 전문가가 보기에 남한의 핵 개발 능력, 핵 무장 능력은 어느 정도라고 보시는가요?
If you're asking, could South Korea build the bomb? Does it have the technical capabilities to do so? The answer is obviously yes. I mean, when South Korea has it is one of the most proficient technical powers in the world. And for example, you know, I've been in South Korea many times. I've been to Daejeon, and I've watched their nuclear fuel fabrication facility. It is the most beautiful in the world. I mean, it is so, the automation, everything is so well done. I went down to Busan. I visited Doosan Heavy Industry. They make the heavy forged steel vessels for American reactors because we've lost that capability. So South Korea is so advanced technically that if South Korea decided they needed to build a bomb, they could do so. They have a few problems along the way, technical problems. They have lots of political problems, but they have some technical problems with that. And that is, at this point, they do not have the bomb fuel. That is the plutonium or the highly enriched uranium. And so it would take them some time to be able to make that bomb fuel. So it would take some time. But even that, again, could they technically get there? The answer is yes. Politically, the answer is, in my opinion, it's a very bad idea.
시간이 더 걸릴 거라는
그렇죠. 농축하는데 사실은 그 농축 시설을 만들고 농축하는데 아무런 제재가 없다 하는 가정하에서도 시간이 좀 꽤 걸린다는 말씀하시나요?
예. 교수님, 저는 그 조금 전에 말씀하셨던 내용 중에 맨 마지막에 하셨던 한국의 핵무장이 정치적으로는 나쁜 선택이 될 거다라고 하는 그 표현이 다소 좀 눈길이 가던데 조금만 좀 더 설명을 더 해주시면 좋겠습니다.
There are many reasons actually why it's a bad choice. The worst reason is because it's going to make your life and the life of all people in South Korea much more dangerous. So in other words, South Korea getting the bomb is going to make the Korean Peninsula a very dangerous place. And the reason for that is that you would now have two countries with two leaders with very little experience in how to handle nuclear things, how to respond in a crisis. And the last thing you want those two leaders to have is the nuclear capability that they can respond. And if both of them have it, then you have the chance of an inadvertent nuclear exchange, a miscalculation, an accident in one side or another. And since the North Koreans have accomplished being able to build nuclear weapons, which is, in my opinion, sort of 2003, 2004 timeframe, and they tested the first one in 2006. So certainly since that time, for the last 15 or 17 years or so. So in that time also, we've not reached close to having a nuclear exchange. And if both South and North have them, inexperienced government, not having the hand of the sort of steady hand of the American government to make sure to slow things down, that's going to make it dangerous. Yongpyeong Island, which was a few weeks after I was there in 2010. Just imagine if that's then a nuclear exchange, what that would do to the Korean Peninsula. So if I were in the American government, I would do everything that I could to make sure that South Korea does not develop its own independent nuclear deterrent.
네, 박사님, 조금 전에 한국의 핵 무장이 우발적인 핵 사고를 유발할 수도 있기 때문에 리스키하다고 설명을 해주셨는데, 글쎄요, 이 핵이라고 하는 건 한반도에만 있는 게 아니라 미국도 갖고 있고 다양한 나라에서 많이 갖고 있는데, 그렇다면 미국에서는 우발적인 핵사고라는 게 그럼 없다고 봐야 되는지, 아니면 미국이 그걸 막기 위해서 별도의 노력을 하고 있다는 뜻인지, 어떤 생각이신지요?
So it's an enormous effort. Let me recommend a book which answers your question, and the book is called Command and Control. It's a few years old, maybe 5 or 6, and it explains in great detail the systems that are in place in order to avoid a nuclear accident, a nuclear misuse, and so forth. And it's just enormous. It's there throughout the entire military system, through the nuclear. I come from the nuclear complex. Los Alamos actually is not a military installation. It's a scientific institution. But it's there from the Department of Energy, which is where Los Alamos Laboratory is, through the military. And so it's enormous that has to put in. And I don't know, the dollar figure that goes with that. I'm not sure that anybody does, but it doesn't matter. It's enormous. And so South Korea would have to build all of that up with command and control. And let me just say, after all the safety things and everything we've built in, we still have had accidents in the past, with nuclear weapons dropping in the coast of Spain, with one in Thule, Greenland, in one of our bombers, where the bomber caught fire. So we've had those accidents. We've had, in 1970, we've had one of the underground nuclear tests. Actually didn't just seep, nuclear radioactivity. It actually blew out and it spewed radioactivity all over. So I wonder which one of your provinces in South Korea is going to be willing to host your first nuclear test. So that's what people need to think about. It's an enormous commitment. It will take away from your military's focus on its conventional capabilities. It will sidetrack it. And again, from my standpoint, you don't want to go there, and you don't need to go there.
진짜 그 해안가에다가 실수로 핵무기도 떨어뜨리고 사실 우리가 모르는 사이에 우여곡절 많은 사건이 있었네요. 그래서 사실은 그 핵무기 자체를 가지고도 한반도에 좁아터진 이 지역에다가 핵무기를 남북한이 나란히 갖고 있었을 때에 그 핵무기의 우발적인 발사 내지는 우발적인 사고 이걸 막기 위한 예산을 많이 써야 되는데 그런 긴장도 관리를 해야 되고 거기에
우발적으로 사고가 많이 나는 모양이에요.
그렇죠. 사실 우리가 모르는 사이에 대단히 많은 사고가 발생한 걸로 말씀을 하시네요. 예. 단순히 우리 그 무기고에 핵무기 하나 딱 넣어놓고 우리 핵 가졌다라고 주장하는 그 선에서 끝난다는 게 아니라는 말씀이십니다. 박사님, 최근 북한이 이러저러한 다양한 미사일을 쐈습니다. 탄도미사일서부터 잠수함 발사 미사일까지 이제 남은 차례는 추가 핵실험이라고 얘기를 하는데 어떻습니까? 전문가께서 보시기에 북한이 조만간 핵실험을 시작할 것으로 봅니까? 어떻습니까?
Yeah, so North Korea has done 6 nuclear tests, which, by the way, is the same as India and Pakistan. And North Korea has learned more from those nuclear tests than India and Pakistan, because they did theirs very close together, where they didn't have a chance to learn from the failure or the success of one for the other. North Koreans have spaced theirs out. They've learned a lot. However, North Korea also has shown us, they tried to show the world, they have all these different delivery systems. They say they're going to put nuclear warheads on the short-range missiles. They're going to put them on the intermediate range. They're going to put them on the ICBMs. And now they recently showed us a new ICBM that would be solid, rocket fuel, the Hwasong 18. And then they're going to put them in submarines. Then they're going to put on hypersonic glide vehicles. And then they're going to have maybe battlefield nuclear weapons. Well, for all of those weapons, 6 tests are nowhere near enough. And so if they're serious to field those different delivery capabilities, they need more nuclear tests. And so within North Korea, I'm sure there's a lot of push for saying we need to do more nuclear tests. And as your media has reported in South Korea, they've been ready for more than a year up at Punggye-ni. So they've been ready, but yet they haven't done one. And so I expect them to do one more. More than one, actually. If they're serious about developing such a broad range of delivery capabilities, they'd have to do more than one nuclear test. Why haven't they tested yet? I don't know the answer to that. But one thing I can tell you for sure, from talking to my Chinese nuclear colleagues, which I have for more than almost 30 years, for the Chinese nuclear colleagues and the Chinese government are very concerned about North Korea nuclear tests because their test site at Punggye-ni is pretty close to the Chinese border. And when the North Koreans tested the big one in 2017, the building shook across the border and the Chinese people were scared. And of course, they're always scared that maybe you have radioactive leakage out of the test tunnel. So far, the North Koreans have actually been very good, but one never knows. And so I'm sure the Chinese government has put pressure on the North Koreans and say, don't test. At what point they'll decide they're going to do it anyway, that I'm not sure.
추가로 핵실험을 할 가능성이 굉장히 높다고
북한은
하면 단 북한에 자기가 이제 중국 그 핵물리학자 친구들도 있다.
예.
있는데 그들이 북한 핵실험에 대해서 대단히 우려하고 있는 게 어떤 정치적인 요인도 있지만은 지정학적인 갈등도 있지만은 무엇보다도 이 중국 만주와 가까운 지역에서 핵실험을 해서 거기서 날라오는 방사능과 그다음에 충격파 이것을 중국도 느꼈다는 겁니다. 거기에 대한 우려를 상당히 표현하고 있기 때문에 북한이 핵실험을 하더라도 중국의 어떤 반발 이런 것도 고려를 할 수밖에 없다. 그런 우리가 사실 얼핏 잘 알지 못했던 어떤 북한 입장에서 보면 이 관리해야 될 리스크가 또 있는 거죠.
박사님, 이건 조금 좀 예민한 질문일 수도 있겠습니다만 오늘 인터뷰 자체가 다 예민하니까요. 한국에서는 우리가 미국의 반도체 공장을 지어주기를 이제 미국 정부가 원하고 있기 때문에 우리가 미국의 반도체 공장을 짓는 것에 동의하는 조건으로 한국 자체의 핵 무장을 미국이 용인하거나 허용하는 답을 받아오는 빅딜이 있을 수 있지 않겠느냐. 는 이야기가 있습니다. 그게 얼마나 바람직한지 아닌지는 모르겠습니다만 이런 시나리오에 대해서 개인적으로 어떻게 생각하십니까?
It's completely unrealistic. And the reason is that the United States governments, almost from the beginning means Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the end of the Second World War, has made one of its highest priorities to limit the number of countries in the world that have nuclear weapons. And so, for example, during the Manhattan Project, British scientists were here at Los Alamos in the United States working with the Americans. When the Manhattan Project was finished, the Americans cut off the Brits and said, you shouldn't develop nuclear weapons. They did it on their own. The French also eventually wound up doing it on their own. And then the US put an enormous amount of effort into Atoms for Peace in order to distribute peaceful nuclear energy around the world, but don't build a bomb. They, from the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty on and all of what I call the fabric of non-proliferation, the Americans have been central to get countries like South Korea to focus on peaceful nuclear energy and don't go the military side. So what you are suggesting would then have the Americans totally break, with over 50 years of effort to limit the number of countries that would develop nuclear weapons, and to have one of its own allies actually develop nuclear weapons, and either just turn a blind eye or actually help them in some way, in order to get a semiconductor factory in return, would be totally against everything that the United States has stood for. And so in my opinion, the Americans won't go there. And particularly what's important is the North Korean nuclear threat doesn't require that sort of combination of American nuclear arms and South Korean nuclear arms. It just isn't. We know our alliance knows how to deter North Korea, in spite of the fact that they have nuclear weapons. Certainly conventionally, the combination of South Korean military, which is very good, the UN and the US on the peninsula in South Korea can deter North Korea, from a conventional standpoint. And the American nuclear deterrent is there for anything nuclear, if it would be needed. For North Korea, you don't even need you don't need the American nuclear weapons. Our conventional horsepower is enough to be able to cause, essentially so much damage in North Korea if, North Korea attacks. I mean, all of our answers have to be defensive answers in case that North Korea attacks. So we know how to deter North Korea conventionally. We don't even need nuclear weapons. We have the nuclear weapons of the United States to back it up. And the worst thing South Korea could do then is to complicate those matters, again, because it will just make the Korean peninsula more dangerous.
이게 정말
미국의 핵우산 안에 있어라.
핵우산 안에 있어라. 그리고 미국이라는 나라가 어떤 나라냐. 아주 이 자기가 살고 있는 나라인데 아주 객관적으로 설명을 하네요. 그 맨하탄 프로젝트에서 영국하고 같이 공동 프로젝트로 1940년대에 핵무기를 개발을 했는데 결국 개발이 어느 정도 자신감을 갖는 순간 영국의 핵물리학자들 다 쫓아냈다고 하네요.
우리만 해야 되고.
그렇죠. 핵무기를 독점하고 싶어하는.
네.
사실 그 한국 내에서 여전히 그 한국 내 자체 핵무장에 대한 논의가 이어지고 있습니다. 그 가운데 하나가 이 미중이 패권을 놓고 갈등하고 있는 사이에서 한국이 일단 핵 저질러 놓고 보면 핵을 무장하고 보면 미국이 어느 순간에 중국에 대한 어떤 견제 전선에서 한국이 필요하기 때문에 한국의 핵 보유국주의를 용인할 것이다. 암묵적으로. 그런 시나리오도 있습니다. 교수님 보시기에 어떻습니까? 이 시나리오가 좀 타당하다고 생각하시는지요?
So let me just say, with all due respect, you don't want to go there. You don't want to tempt the United States in some fashion to see whether it can hurt South Korea. So first of all, you start with the whole prestige. You've got this beautiful country that's so enormously respected for its technological and business capabilities, and for the hallyu, from a cultural standpoint. So you've got this beautiful country, and now you're going to try to take on the United States and what will be a good part of the Western world by developing your own nuclear weapons. So you don't want to go there. So, for example, just one of the things that would happen, where the United States could come back to South Korea is right now, in my opinion, South Korea has the best nuclear reactor and supply industry in the world. The other countries, the United States, Russia to some extent, France, are having difficulties building reactors within budget, in reasonable fashion from an economic standpoint. South Korea is just finishing the fourth reactor in the Middle East, in the United Arab Emirates. It's done a great job. It's moved that along. South Korea itself has a lot of nuclear reactors, and some 30% or so of your electricity is supplied by nuclear reactors. It all depends on initially on American technology, on American patents. And so that business would go away. It would go away. And so instead of South Korea being able to supply a nuclear reactor to Poland or to somebody else or somebody else in the Middle East, its nuclear business is going to dry up. And your own reactors may not be able to get the fuel because right now you don't have that capability. You'd eventually have to go ahead and build your own centrifuge capabilities for your reactors, but then you still need to buy the uranium. And so you will have difficulties through the entire business world. So it's just not just the issue, can the United States and Washington hurt South Korea enough with sanctions in order to make it back up? You don't want to go there. Why in the world would you want to threaten not only your whole nuclear industry, but then, the combination of the Hyundais, the Samsungs, the LGs, and all of those. You don't want to do that. That's my view.
질문 하나하나가 예민하고 답변 하나하나가 아슬아슬한.
사실은 직설적으로 이 대목은 사실은 조금 부연 설명이 좀 필요할 것 같습니다만 제가 이제 미국의 피터슨 국제경제연구소에서 1900년 이후에 경제, 미국과 유럽과 뭐 기타 등등 강대국이라고 하는 나라들이 서로 아니면 약소국에 대해서 경제 제재를 했지 않습니까? 그 경제 제재를 한 사례를 모두 분석을 해서 해본 결과 실제로 성공률이 거의 4%밖에 안 됐거든요. 근데 1970년대, 80년대 초반에 미국이 대만과 한국을 경제 제재한 적이 있어요.
그래요?
네, 핵 개발과 관련해서. 그런데 가장 성공률이 높은 나라가 한국이었어요. 대만하고.
경제 제재 효과가 직방이더라.
그러니까 미국이 뭐 북한을 했거나 아니면 이란을 했거나 그래도 뭐 자기가 원하는 성과를 거두질 못했는데 정치적 목적을 달성하지 못했는데 한국하고 대만은 바로 꼬리 내렸거든요.
그만큼 절실하지 않았다는 뜻도 되겠네요.
절실하지 않을 뿐만 아니라 미국 시장의 의존도가 너무 큰 거예요.
높고.
너무 큰 거예요. 바로 해커 박사가 그 비슷한 지금 말씀하신 해커 박사의 내용을 좀 더 리마인드 시켜드리면은 한국이 가지고 있는 핵발전소 프로젝트를 할 수 있는 기술과 역량, 그 원천 기술을 미국이 갖고 있지 않느냐. 당신 수출 못하게 막을 수 있다.
그러니까 왜 많은 걸 좀 생각 좀 해봐라. 그런 얘기 하지 말고
그렇죠.
그런 얘기였어요.
사실 이게 저희들이 글로벌머니토크가 이 어떤 핵 무장을 해야 된다 안 해야 된다는 어떤 방향을 정해놓고 말씀드리는 인터뷰를 한 건 아닙니다. 인터뷰 프로그램은 기본적으로 인터뷰 대상자의 발언과 시각을 그대로 전달하는 게 기본 덕목이죠. 그렇기 때문에 그렇다고 해서 우리 글로벌머니토크가 핵무장을 해야 된다, 내는 반대한다. 그 입장을 띄고 설명을 드린 건 아닙니다. 단 해커 박사의 지금 현재의 시각이 핵무장을 하게 되면은 우리가 하고 있는 뭐 UAE에 아니면 폴란드에 여러 나라의 핵발전 프로젝트를 수출하고 있지 않습니까? 수출할 움직임을 보이고 있고 그 자체가 원천 봉쇄될 수도 있다.
저 인터뷰 응해주셔서 고맙습니다.
감사합니다. 사실 한반도 내에서 사실 핵 리스크는 실제 존재하고 있는 거죠.
그렇기도 하고 미국의 뭐 정부가 북핵에 대해서 어떤 고민을 시작할 때 항상 이분께 조언을 구할 것이고,
그렇죠.
그럴 경우에 이런
미국의 시각을
이런 토론이 오갈 거 아니겠습니까?
그렇죠.
그 이야기를 우리 이제 글로벌 머니톡을 통해서 유추해 볼 수 있으니까 매우 중요한
사실 있는 그대로의 시각을 그들의 시각을 알고 있는 거가 훨씬 중요하죠. 사실
미국인들은 한국에 대해서 전문가들은 이렇게 생각한다. 건데
실제로 한국의 보수 세력들이 보수 진영에서 나름대로 그 핵무장에 대한 어떤 희구가 있습니다. 그건 사실이에요. 그래서 오늘 인터뷰에서 한번
거기에 대해서 어떻게 생각하는지
자세히 들어봤습니다. 미국의 시각이었던.
자, 글로벌 머니톡 여기서 마무리하겠습니다. 다음 주 인터뷰가 혹시 추진되고 있는 게 있다면
이 영어 좀 써도 될까요? De-dollarization, 그러니까 탈달러와 최근에 뭐 사실은 부자의 몸조심인지 아니면 실제로 어떤 우려인지 미국 내에서 외환 보유고에서 외환 보유액에 차지하는 달러 비중이 줄었다. 그 다음에 중국과 러시아, 그 다음에 그 사우디아라비아, 인도가 그러니까 그 미국식 용어입니다. 로컬 커런시, 지역 통화로 무역 대금을 결제하기 시작을 했다.
네.
그러한 여러 가지 때문에 달러의 수요가 줄고 있고 이게 어쩌면은 탈달러화의 시작일 수 있지 않겠는가. 그래서
이야기가 있나 봐요.
예,
미국에서도.
그래서 미국 내에서 가장 먼저 탈달러화의 가능성을 제기한 제임스 리카즈를 인터뷰를 요청을 해놨습니다. 네.
자, 다음 주 주제는 뭐 그렇게 될 것 같기는 하다.
예.
이야기까지 전해드리고 오늘 글로벌 모니터는 여기서 마무리하겠습니다.
예.
자, 이제 여러분들 좀 쉬세요.
감사합니다.